I know that there's a lot of noise about what games you should play, what games you shouldn't every week. Sometimes I even hyperfixate on weird games that you shouldn't play, but today I wanted to cut through the noise and give you 15 games that you should play. These are games that I have played on my own that I do think are underrated, some of them criminally underrated, but these are just my personal opinions. My opinions and your opinions might not always line up, but either way, I got 15 underappreciated games that I think you deserve to check out. So, without further ado, let's get started. Let's start off with Quantum Break. Now, this is a no-brainer, and anybody that has been here for any amount of time is going to say they knew that I was going to talk about this game. It's from Remedy, one of my favorite developers, the people behind the original Max Payne games, Alan Wake, and of course Control, which everyone loves. And look, I'm going to tell you right now, Quantum Break walks so Control could run, and also Quantum Break is just as good, but significantly different. Quantum Break had a weird approach to live-action cutscenes mixed with gameplay, but to be honest, weird, quirky, mixed media stuff is like a gaming tradition at this point. The good thing here is that it was actually live-action, overlapping in some very impressive and interesting-looking ways. There are characters in the game played by actual actors. You got Aidan Gillen from Game of Thrones, you got Lance Reddick, you got both of the Ashmore twins. No, one of them's not Jesse Williams. I still think Jesse Williams looks like an Ashmore twin. I'm getting sidetracked here. This is essentially, of course, a time game, time travel, the manipulation of time, messing with time, how time affects everything, and the drama and tension and stuff that goes along with it, with some interesting, weird science. None of it is particularly original, but it's the Remedy treatment with a side of cool, stylized, slow-motion superpower shooting. You're essentially a guy in a jacket doing cool slow-mo tricks, the graphics for the time still look incredible, and it's just an all-around exciting, engaging, and geeky concept game that I don't think it gets enough credit. It was kind of lambasted for its live-action stuff, but I think it's worth playing. Next, at number 14, speaking of Xbox exclusives, in some ways Sunset Overdrive could be seen as the ultimate Xbox One exclusive. For a lot of people, it's like the poster child for it, mostly because of all the Microsoft games that came out during the console's launch, and the ones that came after all got ported to other systems eventually, but not Sunset Overdrive. Technically, it is its own IP, separate from Microsoft, and eventually they did find a way to get the game's rights over to Insomniac. So in 2018, a port of the game did eventually come out to PC. Still, in terms of staying power, because it's not on a PlayStation platform, it's still exclusive, or it still feels exclusive, because now Insomniac is exclusive to the Sony side of things. So we doubt we'll ever see Sunset Overdrive switch sides anytime soon. Or who knows, in our dreams, maybe Sony will give Insomniac a chance for a second whack at this game. I don't know. Only then I think we'll really get the recognition this game actually deserves. It is no joke, it is a great game. It's one of the most fun and unique open-world games out there, let alone the fact that it's an Xbox game that can run on the Steam Deck. It's chaotic punk rock, it's Jet Set Radio on crack, but the game itself is still presented in somewhat of a family-friendly way. You can be a little devious here, but for the most part, it's just colorful. It's crazy. It's also worth mentioning that without Sunset Overdrive, Insomniac might not have ever been able to make the fundamentals of traversal in the Spider-Man games. This game excelled at free-flowing, getting around, and essentially grinding around rails and running along walls and double jumping, all at breakneck speeds. It felt great. It's got a great soundtrack, it's got a great game world, a cartoony, freaky, open-world adventure that just has a lot of weapons. It is essentially Tony Hawk with guns and mutants, and we want more people to play it. Coming in next is Returnal. So in some circles, this might not be considered underrated, but it definitely wasn't as popular as some of the bigger Sony first-party games. But all those games are very different to this housemarque third-person roguelike. Yes, I hear you rogue purists out there. You see, it's not applying exactly the legacy term of rogue to exactly what these... It doesn't matter. Is Returnal awesome? Yes, it is awesome. It's a dense game, it has a mysterious narrative, and a white-knuckle sense of combat with creative weapons and tight controls. But let's be real, those aren't the reasons why most people probably didn't play through this one when it first launched. It's hard. It's really freaking hard. It's really, really hard, and that combined with its unique structure, repetition and going through again and more repetition has you learning the etched runes of this foreign planet more than some people would care to. But eventually, for those that push through it, it really sings. The gameplay loop is so finely tuned here, you just want to keep diving back into new runs and fighting what the game can throw at you next in these procedurally generated sections, with brutal enemy encounters with just some of the best, most unique enemies we've seen in games. You know, it's a pretty game, it's got a good story, and on top of that, they also injected good co-op into the game post-launch, and a lot of other really good reasons to replay it. They've been supporting it, and they had developer commentary, which is always really great to see. So, Returnal to me covers all the bases and is easily one of the most underrated PS5 exclusives.
Runners see the city in a different way. They see the flow. Rooftops become pathways and conduits.
Next up, we have Mirror's Edge, kicking it old school with 2008, and to be honest, probably a game that we've covered in some of these games you should play videos before. Look, I didn't know how, when, or where to place any of the games in this video because there's really a lot of old games, or sequel, or whatever the hell you want to call it. Games are around now, but Mirror's Edge is an awesome shorter indie but AAA-esque first-person parkour game. The main character is named Faith. She's like, I don't know, a cool, cyberpunky, anti-corporate messenger, that's really it. But the excuse to hop in here is to actually hop in here. It's jumping over things, doing flips, and the game really often puts you in first person, like really in there, to the point where your hands, feet, and whole world movements really look and sound awesome. It was so cool at the time because this was still like the experimental HD gaming era. They were bold enough to make a military shooting game with not that much shooting. It's also futuristic, really good looking, cinematic. It's just fun. It's weird for me to even just straight up call it underrated because it feels almost like it should be grandfathered into a video like this. It should be obvious, but I know times change, so it's still worth making. There was a sequel, Mirror's Edge Catalyst, but like a reboot thing that I don't think was that good. And the first game is still playable these days, so make sure to give it a shot.
Militia Titan spotted, chassis number BT-7274. Taking fire.
We Titan down. Well done, pilot.
Next, over at number 11, Titanfall 2. I still think everybody keeps talking about Titanfall 2 being underrated so much to the point that eventually it's just going to be known as just a good game because, like, duh, everybody loved it. But for now, I'm still considering it underrated because if I'm still encountering people that haven't tried Titanfall 2 or don't know why it's so good, then that means I'm still going to have to talk about it here. So, this one is the follow-up to the original Titanfall. Respawn Entertainment, the developers, made the first game, but it really was like a fun concept and almost like proof of concept experiment about pilots, first-person shooter pilots running around on the ground in a battlefield, but then also your pilots, so you can take out a big mech, and then you pilot that. I'm saying pilot too many times. It was a great idea, the multiplayer was so great, and then for the sequel they doubled down on that with the multiplayer but gave us a full-fledged single-player campaign that worked over time to be as creative, as interesting, as unique, and as memorable as it could possibly be. This is a game that you play and you just instantly get hooked. It's not only really good feeling shooting and of course the fun dynamic between running around on foot and then getting out your big mech suit with different loadouts and really unique abilities to them, but they just throw so many different things at you in gameplay-wise, shooting game-wise, that just make for a memorable campaign that plenty of other shooters in the last decade have not given us. Like seriously, there's one easy, probably 45-minute level here that completely resets the game in a way that I never expected, and it's probably one of my favorite things I've ever done in a first-person shooter. So yeah, if you haven't played this one yet, you better check it out now.
Maximum weapon power.
Now, down at number 10, I have another game from Housemarque. I talked about Returnal, the PS5 exclusive, but then they also made games like Dead Nation, Alien Nation, Super Stardust HD, an old PS3 game of theirs that I absolutely loved. These guys have earned their chops, but they released a game, Nex Machina, I don't even know what year it was, but Nex Machina is really fun. Essentially, it's like if they were making a twin-stick shooter that was doing a little bit of what they do best, making these arcadey, addictive games, but also almost like, what if they were doing Robotron or Smash TV? If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm just saying nerdy old gaming stuff. Nex Machina is a super old-school feeling type of game. You're running around like in a shooter, you have like a little human dude, and then you're just trying to shoot everything. There are these levels where a bunch of enemies swarm you from all over the place, and you're trying to save human beings by teleporting around the map, picking up different power-ups, doing wave after wave, and just getting absolutely swarmed by enemies where you live by your wits. You gotta really be light on your feet, use that dash ability to jump around, zip around, use special abilities like swords, charge-up shots, all kinds of things to make it out of these puzzles alive, really. I think that's the best way to describe the game, and I'm saying that while like waving my arms around like a maniac, but it's because Nex Machina is just so fun. Eventually, like, it is another arcadey type game that leans on story just a little bit, but there is a really cool, fun boss battle towards the end that is both like a bullet hell shooter and a twin stick shooter that I think is really, really special. I think this is just a great ass game here, so also check this one out, and it's available on PC and PlayStation.
Hannah, you're supposed to be off today. I
had some free time, so I thought...
Next on the list, we have 2017's Prey. Man, what a stacked year for video games. Prey is another one from Arcane, the developers of Dishonored, and this one is essentially BioShock in space. If you haven't figured it out by now, it's one of my favorite genres of things ever. This is a game that wears its System Shock influence on its sleeve, and with that comes good things and bad things. Some people, the unwashed masses, think Prey is boring. Right now, if you could see me narrating this video, I'm pacing, I'm thrusting my fists, I'm just absolutely being a sweaty nerd, getting exasperated by my lungs trying to explain to people why Prey is so good. But at the end of the day, I'll let them think what they want. For the rest of us, Prey is incredible. It has an addictive world to explore, just an awesome-looking concept space station with aliens that have kind of unique tricks and habits, interesting weapons and approaches, a lot of deciding what you want to do, how you want to progress, similar to something like BioShock, and one of the coolest guns ever, the glue gun, where you shoot out these gel blobs to kind of form different things to use them as stairs or whatever. That's something that I still think about to this day. Prey is slow, maybe it takes a little bit to ramp up, it's janky in some spots, but the fact that some people bounce off of it and think it's boring shows me that we still have more work to do to preach the good word about Prey. Up next is Sleeping Dogs. You probably know by now that I'm going to mention this one because I would say most of the gaming community, a lot of you guys watching this video, are really savvy. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir here. Maybe you all know that Sleeping Dogs is incredible, in which case I'm sorry, but still, at the very least, it's 5 guys at a cocktail party. I've always said with every game like this, you gotta reach 5 people. If I can reach 5 people right now who haven't played Sleeping Dogs, then mission accomplished. It's something really a rare, unique, open-world adventure game that we just don't see, and we should see more of. This is Grand Theft Auto, but it's set in Hong Kong with actually great crime narrative, as well as its martial arts combat. That's what Sleeping Dogs gives us, controlling main character Wei Shen and going through the world and really doing a pretty different approach to a badass action game like this because it's a lot of hand-to-hand combat, that's kind of your go-to, and the combat mechanics stem from stuff like the Batman Arkham games, those types of brawlers, but this cranks it up by a million by making it really, really fun to play, giving you lots of environments to just mess people up in. You can smash dudes through windows, throwing them into different objects, and then unlocking and learning new sweet kung fu moves to do it all. This is one of those games that's just really hard to mess up. It's just oozing swag, great characters, great missions, not too short, not too long, just a great, totally complete package. There's no weird caveats or anything with this one, you just got to try it out.
Miller, Chopper's been grounded. Repeat.
Jensen! You're welcome.
Coming in next is Deus Ex Mankind Divided. This is the follow-up from Square Enix to the good old Deus Ex Human Revolution, and it's essentially that game, but like just a little bit better. This is an action RPG set in a very interesting cyberpunk future, and it's not just the mile-wide, incredibly deep premise that we like. Also, Adam Jensen as a main character is interesting, and we just loved him from the previous game, but also just the way these games are mechanically done, the way the worlds are built, and how you can approach things and deal with problems is so fun and thoughtful. There's a lot of time to stop, think about what type of machine human you're building, how you're upgrading yourself to be more physical or better talking yourself out of situations or better hacking things, and man, does it really, really deliver here. It's very rare that I play these types of games, and not only play them, but once I was done with Mankind Divided, I immediately started a new game just to play it a different way, because that's how thoughtful, meaningful, and different some of the progression could feel here, where you dump your upgrades into and how it changes the game around you. It's awesome. It's a shame they never really kind of concluded this saga here. Really, the pacing, the progression here builds really, really good, and then it just kind of stops, and it's a little bit of a bummer to see. It seems like the game was kept open-ended for a sequel, but that's never going to happen. It's a shame because a lot of people talked about or played Human Revolution, but a lot of people skewed away from Mankind Divided, and I think either way, no matter what, both games are worth experiencing. Up next, we have Mad Max. Now, this is a game that took a lot of people by surprise. This released many, many years after we heard that they were making a Mad Max game that was supposed to be a tie-in with the awesome Mad Max Fury Road movie. And the thing about this game is that it doesn't necessarily feel really tied to those. It's hard to really place the setting here, but it is Max, and it is the Wasteland, and it is car stuff, and it's awesome that they took the good old Batman formula, or the Arkham formula, and applied it to open-world Wasteland, kind of driving around and smashing into things. Just for that alone, I think the game is worth checking out, but I think what keeps it underrated is that, yeah, there's only a certain amount of people that love the Mad Max movies, and then also, 2015 was a really, really stacked time for video games. And this one dropped right around the time that The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt did, and that's a hard game to go up against. Even if they're on opposite sides of the map in terms of what type of games they are, people's attention, their wallets, they only have room for so much. But really, this one is worth trying. Like I said, if you grew up loving the Batman games or the Arkham Asylum games, going around punching things, fighting large groups of enemies in the open world, and then of course there's your Batmobile stuff. But here, a lot of time is dedicated to driving around and ramming into stuff, and it works, it's satisfying, it's fun, and it's in a cool, weird world that I liked experiencing. It's not the most amazing thing, it's not the best game you've ever played. Some people might see it and skip it and think that, oh, it looks like just like a regular movie tie-in game. But if you try this one, I think you'll like it.
Empty that bus! On it!
Coming in next, I have to tell you about Spec Ops: The Line. This might be a little basic here, but I recommend going out, if you can, grabbing a PS3 or an Xbox 360 and a cheap copy of this game, because yeah, unfortunately, as far as I can tell, you can no longer purchase it on digital storefronts. It's very, very sad to see, and I think there should be protests in the street over this one. But yes, I want more people to talk about this game because it can be very superficially viewed as another military soldier romp, and it does start that way, but very quickly it escalates and gets very dark. I remember when this one first released, plenty of media-focused minded people talked about this game because of the themes and, like I said, just how dark and twisted it ends up getting, but the general public might have missed out on it. I think there are plenty of lists and retrospectives across YouTube, people praising and preaching why this thing is worth it, and I just wanted to throw up the signal booster, bigger exclamation mark, because good God, the turn this game takes is so haunting and so incredibly memorable, I'm never going to forget it. It's also just a pretty solid, somewhat average military shooter, but man, that narrative, that progression, and ultimately where it ends, I haven't been able to stop thinking about for years now. I don't want to overhype it, I don't want to spoil anything, I don't want to give any details, but it is still a game that's worth playing, it's worth seeing to the end. If you're allergic to playing old games, just watch YouTube footage of the ending or something, anything, because it's really unique, it's really original, and for me, it's a reminder of how distinctly, amazingly original a video game can be.
How long was I out for?
15,338 ticks.
That's very specific.
Coming in next, a personal favorite of mine. I've been talking about this game since it released in 2021, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. So on the surface, this is just easy to dismiss as a Marvel gaming cash grab. At that point, there had been a good amount of those, but no, Guardians of the Galaxy is actually a video game by video game people for video game people that happens to have the Guardians of the Galaxy slapped into it. I say that as someone who loved Guardians of the Galaxy here. I'm a comic book nerd, I love the James Gunn movies, but this totally works whether or not you're familiar with them. I just think if you like video games, you're going to like this. It's an action-adventure third-person romp with some light RPG elements traveling through a pretty unique and interesting colorful space adventure world, and it's really fun to play as Star-Lord. At first, He looks like a little bit of a wiener, but he totally grew on me. But also, the game really builds to some crazy cool plot lines for people like Rocket, or for Gamora. It really feels like everything is here. The developers here really understood the assignment of what makes Guardians of the Galaxy great, good excuse sci-fi, technobabble, and beats here and there, but also really lovable, engaging, fun characters, an incredible soundtrack, a feel-good atmosphere, and just a game that's really fun to play. Up next, we have Singularity from 2010. Now this one, Raven Software's last game that they kind of made before just being thrown in to support the rest of Call of Duty games, it was compared to BioShock a lot. A first-person adventure where you're going through an alternative Soviet sci-fi type place, jumping back and forth between timelines where the place was up and running, a shipyard or an experimental base, and then going to the destroyed crazy version of it, fighting both human and mutated weird otherworldly creatures. Sure, sounds a little too much like BioShock, but for its time, it was considerably even more gimmicky. Here, not only with certain tools and weapons that allow you to jump between dimensions for some interesting, fun, janky shootouts, but also because you get a time manipulation device where you can mess around and do some fun stuff. I just think at the end of the day, Singularity is a solid A-type adventure action game with a story that has some really awesome surprises, boats if I may, and it's just yet again another underappreciated gem from Raven Software, who made a bunch of other incredible games. If they were still making games this day and age, I would probably have some of their other games on their list, but it's a different time, so now all we have is Singularity, but I like it. Down at number 2, we have Days Gone. Now, Days Gone doesn't necessarily, on the surface, look like anything special. It's another open-world, post-apocalyptic zombie game, this time on motorcycles in the mountains of Oregon, but don't let that put you off. I know some people either hated this game, or if you Google the game, all you see is just like review stuff talking about how the game underperformed or how everyone made fun of it. It was called like a 6 out of 10 game, and while I don't necessarily give scores to video games anymore, because I think scores are for people that don't like vegetables, I think Days Gone is actually a good game. Now granted, it launched pretty buggy, but they quickly fixed those bugs a couple of months later, but some squandered the game. Some people didn't like having to refuel their motorcycle as they're exploring a pretty beautiful open world. I think Oregon and these mountains and mountainside roads and stuff were actually a really unique open world setting. It takes a little bit to get going, and the main character, Deacon John, is pretty unlikable. He freaking talks to himself like a weirdo for most of the game, muttering to himself like a PS1 Metal Gear Solid guard. But you know what? He still grew on me. The story still grew on me, and some of the crazy fights and some of the encounters in the world, not just with a bunch of the different types of freakers, but human encounters and stuff, everything just got really, really cool in a game that I felt like I was living in. Yes, it is still maybe a little too long, but I was living in this open world and I still really enjoyed it. I thought climbing to different sniper towers and stuff like that to scout out and see what was upcoming was really fun, and the giant horde zombie stuff in the late game was also just a really great experience. For me, Days Gone might not be the best thing ever. Again, what is a 6 out of 10, really? But this is a game I think that got way more hate than it deserves. And finally, we have Prince of Persia Warrior Within. Yes, I'm talking about the middle child. I've talked about it in so many other videos before, like why usually people don't play the second in every one of these lists type of things. This game is the middle chapter sandwiched between the awesome original Prince of Persia Sands of Time, and then kind of bungled ending Prince of Persia The Two Thrones. Warrior Within has a completely different tone and atmosphere to it. It's much darker, it's much grittier. Dare I say it's more 2000. Yes, this is a case of I say it all the time. It's not necessarily cooler, it's cringier, but for me it makes something that is just that much more fun. A feather in its cap, or an Under Armour over your bicep, whatever those things were. That guys wear to the gym that only go over one arm like the prince does in this one, where he's super gritty and edgy and he uses 2 swords and he shreds people up, but he's fleeing an island that's like falling apart, and the Dahaka, this time-traveling beast, is like slowly chasing after him, and he has to figure out how he can once again rip apart time and figure out his future by really just going through a lot of hell. There's a lava island, there's sexy people in bikinis and blades, there's like war stuff happening, there's a heavy metal soundtrack. It also has one of my favorite gameplay sequences of all time, a time rewind puzzle involving a drawn-out battle against essentially a sub-boss Titan-type character, and to this day, it's just got a special place in my heart. If you played your share of the Prince of Persia games, but for some reason never made it too far into Warrior Within or overlooked it because the tone is different, don't sleep on it, man. This game is incredible still. Those are 15 underrated games I got for you today. We tried to go a little across the board, but I've been playing games my whole life, so it's hard to sum up all my thoughts in one video, so I want to hear yours down in the comments. What are some great games that you think just don't get the love or don't get enough love? And as always, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.